How close do you think the deal is to getting done? Good morning.
I mean, it's definitely a positive step. I think from a Ukrainian perspective, their main goal was resuming the US security assistance and US intelligence sharing, which is not critical to their war effort, but it's incredibly important. They'll be very, very happy with the outcome of these talks. And as you said, the ball's now in Moscow's court. I think there's a lot of rightful cynicism here about Vladimir Putin. He has a history of not abiding by ceasefires and breaking pretty much every agreement that he's ever signed. So, yeah, I mean, cautious optimism. Again, very happy about the resumption of US security assistance.
What is the role of Donald Trump in all of this, Jimmy?
I mean, he's an agent of chaos, really.
Is it constructive chaos?
It's very difficult to say. I think the Ukrainians would have been happy to agree to something like this, even without the suspension of security assistance. And they've always claimed that they've been prepared for peace, right? But what they want is a peace that is sustainable. They don't want to agree to some form of freeze only to see the war start again in, say, a year, 2 years' time, with Russia rearmed and remanned and ready to take over the rest of Ukraine. So from their perspective, it's always been that they've wanted this war to end, but they've wanted this war to end in a way that guarantees their sovereignty, their freedom, and the rights of their people.
To use an American expression, what's the off-ramp that can be put together for Vladimir Putin?
Well, here's the thing. A lot of people say, well, you don't want to put Putin in a corner. You don't want to, pressure him too much. But he's got such a command of the domestic Russian information environment. He could tell the Russian people tomorrow that this has been a glorious success, and most of them would probably believe him. So, he could, I assume, agree to take the territory that he's already annexed. Ukraine obviously wouldn't agree to that in the long term, but in the short term, they would, potentially agree to, similar to how the North Korean and South Korean hostilities ended, they would both kind of agree that they maintain territorial claims over each other, but the hot war essentially would finish. But he has multiple off ramps here. He just really needs to be prepared to take them.
You're joining us from Kyiv. What does victory look like to Ukrainians?
Well, victory Ukrainians means taking back the entirety of their country.
Do you see that the entirety? Do you see that happening?
Of course, not in the short term, no. But I mean, just look at Syria. Everyone thought that Assad had definitively won. But then his entire, regime came crumbling down almost over a weekend. So I think you can never write these things off. And I think for the Ukrainians, Ukraine will always matter more to Ukrainians than it will to Russians. So at some point, they believe, and I believe as well, they will get their country back, but it will take a significant amount of time, and it's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.
Jimmy Rushton, thank you for your time. You're a foreign policy and security analyst. You're joining us from Kyiv, 11 after 7. Listening, Nicholas Williams, who's a former UK Ministry of Defence, EU and NATO official, now Senior Associate Fellow of the European Leadership Network, joining me now. Mr. Williams, I don't know if you're a rugby bloke, but are we virtually on the try line, and with one large heave and push and maul, we'll get over and score the try? What do you say? Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a bad Welshman. I don't like rugby.
I wish I hadn't said rugby. I apologise.
No, I think what happened yesterday was a step forward, but the Russians will be suspicious. And if nothing is done in writing, if Trump doesn't, or the Americans don't actually detail what this deal means, then I think they will haggle, they will ask questions, and they won't accept an immediate truce without the detail and without some sort of assurance that what they've always wanted, NATO off the table, some sort of elections, some sort of a recognition of their territorial gains, that they won't actually hasten to accept this proposal, which is not worth the paper it's not written on, if I can say that.
Mr. Williams, you've worked in senior positions with the MOD, the EU and NATO. You've been NATO head of operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. You're now Senior Associate Fellow of the European Leadership Network. What sort of leader is Donald Trump? How much is this dynamic playing out in what we're here talking about today?
Well, as your previous
Guest.
interlocutor said he's an agent of chaos. I don't think there's madness or method in his chaos. It's just instinctive, and he wants to do a deal. He is in pursuing this deal. He's made a proposal or forged a proposal to the Russians, and he will see what they respond to. But there are contradictions. He's proposing to resume aid and intelligence to the Ukrainians. That's a contradiction if he wants to get Russians to accept what he's proposing.
But if I were to say to you, and I accept all of what you just said, but we wouldn't be where we are without the chaos, which at times can be constructive chaos, that Trump brings to the table, how would you respond?
Of course, and as one of my former colleagues said, it's only the crassness of President Trump that could get us to this position. But then, is President Trump sophisticated enough, his team sophisticated enough to seize this initiative and go to Moscow with assurances from their perspective that they would need in order to accept this truce?